Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, welcome back to another video, and today we're going to be doing a book discussion. I say discussion instead of review because I'm going to be going over a lot of spoilers and really my overall thoughts about this book. I'm really going in depth into how I feel about this book and what I thought didn't work and how it could be better. I honestly really didn't want to make a review like this for this book. Elliot Brooks, the author of Peace and Turmoil, is a booktuber like myself. Obviously a much larger booktuber than myself, and she's actually one of my favorites. I really respect her and her videos, the way she presents all of her points, and the way she states her opinions. I really enjoy, I really like. But that's why I'm hoping to do this critical, constructive discussion about her books. I'm definitely a huge fan of hers. I support her on Patreon. Like I said, I've bought her book. I've actually bought it twice, and one was actually including one of her big monster boxes. So I have like all of her candles and the character art and stuff like that. So I definitely completely support her and want to continue to support her by giving her an unbiased critical review. And I am hoping to actually be able to assist her in her sequel as a beta reader to hopefully kind of maybe point out things that I'm not too sure why they weren't pointed out to begin with. So jumping to the novel, the earlier parts are kind of difficult to explain. I would commend the writing. It's not bad and I think it flows really well. The characters defined well and I can easily picture them apart from one another, but I honestly barely care what's going on. I'm just slightly above feeling bored. It's still good enough to get through at a reasonable pace, but it feels like I'm just watching a well-narrated political documentary or something, so it's not so much a fault of the book as more this plot really isn't my thing. Most of the critical reviews deem the writing really bad. I can't really speak on that as I'm not very versed in writing myself, but I would recommend that she find a great editor for the sequel. If this many people are pointing out a lot of the errors, then I feel like someone else that she's paying for should be able to as well. It was pretty odd to actually see that most of the glowingly positive reviews are beta readers. That's why I wanted to write this review and hope to become a beta reader for her sequel, because I really want Elliot to succeed and write some really great characters. That's really the theme that I'm tackling in my review and discussion, because she says that this is a character-driven novel, which is a huge problem for me because I don't too much care for most of the characters in this book. In a character-driven story, the plot is used to develop the characters. Many readers love character-driven stories because the author tends to put a premium on developing realistic, flawed, and human characters. Readers can see themselves or someone they love in these characters and as a result connect emotionally. I didn't feel like these characters developed at all. They were the same at the beginning as they were at the end. The only thing that really changed was where they were in the world and where the plot took them. I don't necessarily think this is a bad thing if the characters don't necessarily change, but we saw no development. I feel like this should have been a sequel, as we missed a lot of the characters' growth and plot before the novel even started. For instance, again, this actually isn't even spoilers. This is all stuff that you learn about when you get introduced to the characters. There was a war that should have helped us understand the leaders, Gerard and Pierre. There was a revolution of a nation from slavery. There was a relationship between Guinevere and Roland that is definitely their main plot, even though the romance isn't supposed to be, but I kind of disagree. Dorian is the adopted son / ambassador to his nation. Diedrich is a prince assassin / fiend hunter. Abaddon is a brilliant potion maker / alchemist. Zodia was sheltered and alone on her island. There's a bunch of elites and soldiers with like really intense backstories. All of this is not in the book. This is all told to us and has already happened. I'm sorry to say, and I'm sure it would be really frustrating to do, but I would have put a full stop on this novel and told Elliot to not make this the first book. Honestly, all of this stuff is far more interesting than what's actually in this novel, and would say Peace and Turmoil should have been a fine second novel if I had known and lived through all of this backstory. The more spoiler explanation and critiques of the characters are going to be after this next part. I really want to get into some of the smaller non-character related complaints that don't hit the spoilers yet. So the magic system and the powers is unique in how it's written, but the idea of it necessarily isn't. So pretty much, if you wanted to just be very simple, they have elemental powers. They pull on the elements, and that's how they use their magic. What's nice is that it's written as seeing these colors and pulling on these colors to control the elements. So like, you see different strands of like red, white, or blue or whatever, and then you pull on those strands and then summon fire, water, earth, and stuff like that. So the execution of how they use their powers is unique, but the powers aren't. So really the power system isn't interesting or really imaginative. The explanation and the power creep, or the buildup of the powers, is essentially non-existent. I mean, they get exhausted, but how often and by how much doesn't seem consistent or really attended to. It also feels odd how just anyone can use any of the elements. No one seems to have a focus or affinity. Zodia is supposed to be really powerful. I think Gwen is too, although she's unable to control her temper, which kind of fluctuates her powers. And then furthermore, on top of this, the fighting with the power isn't really interesting or unique either. It's sort of just throwing around an ice spear here or pulling up roots there. None of the way they actually use their powers is written in a way to really make it exciting. This wouldn't necessarily be bad if it's not the focus, which I don't think it is, but since the rest of the book doesn't really hold up well, this just shows as more disappointing. Because again, the powers can just sort of be like a backdrop to the world, it doesn't have to be like a main focus. So a lot of these complaints wouldn't be a complaint if I feel like anything else in the book really made up for it. The creatures or fiends I feel like are praised by people in the book. Again, it's almost like they're just sort of a backdrop, like they're not really super important, and so I wouldn't even have really thought to put it in my review if so many people weren't really praising them. But again, I kind of feel like they were just typical monsters and nothing to really bring up. Besides some of the creatures, they're supposed to have affinity to the auroras or like the elemental magic, but it wasn't really elaborated on. We don't know where they come from, why they're different from other animals. I would go on to say we don't know how they can even be controlled, but it's not really important and probably brought up in the next book. Next point is time and communication seemed really off. They seem to be able to move and communicate too quickly for their distance. I have no idea how long any time took in this book at all, and there were some huge time or scene skip grievances that just had people showing up. Mostly this is a huge issue with Diedrich's plot, which I'll get to in his spoiler discussion. I like the little excerpts at the beginning of each chapter. I would have found a better way to format them though. They weren't really pretty. They're kind of just like paragraphs just put at the bottom of like a blank page. It soon dawned on me very quickly that each one of these is essentially a foreshadowing of the coming chapter, which is interesting if it adds something to the world, like it's magic. Like if they talked about how fire magic is used or something like that, and then they go into a chapter where Guinevere uses her fire magic, but mostly it just straight up gives away what's going to happen next. Like for example, these are kind of the two biggest offenses, but one is about how suicide works in the world, so you know the next chapter is going to be about someone going to commit suicide, so it's not really shocking when it happens. Another one is a letter from one of the soldiers to his wife who's pregnant, and how as soon as they get home they're going to run away and take care of their baby. Can you guess what's going to happen to this man now in the next chapter? It kind of takes any surprise or emotional impact away in a book that already struggles to set up emotional and impactful moments with this too full cast. I almost think a very easy solution would be to just put these at the end of the chapter, so you think, you know, after he commits suicide and you read this paragraph about how suicide's a big deal in their world, you think, wow, this guy must have really struggled to come to this conclusion, and you still got the shock and surprise of this guy committing suicide. And then same thing with the guy after, you know, he ends up dying, and then after he dies, which was a shock, and then you read this letter that he was sent to his wife before he died. And then it's even hits you more harder because you didn't see the death coming, and now you're kind of left with this tragic news that he's never going to go home to his baby. My next point is Brooks isn't actually known for liking romance in her books, so I was actually confused and kind of disappointed when a heavy amount of her characters not only have romantic partners or plots, but it really focuses on it a lot. I'm going to bring this up through all of the spoiler discussions, like each character and like how it has a focus on their relationships. Again, it's not bad that people can be in relationships, but some of them were literally the focus or the plot or like the driving force of these characters. I didn't expect that from this author. My next grievance is I'm not sure if there's a general standard on how to format and when to use italics, but I really grew to dislike them in this book. She italicizes her magic words auroras, called, and even non-magic touched weapons. I mainly don't like this because when I read italics, I put emphasis on the words and read them differently. So for instance, every time she says he pulled out his called dagger, I read it like that in my head. I say called, auroras, touched weapons, stuff like that. And it happens a lot, and I don't feel like she wants us to emphasize it. She's just using it as a way to say, hey, this is my magic system. So I don't know if anybody else feels like that, but it really bugged me because I had to unnecessarily, it broke the flow of the paragraphs when I'm reading it in such a way when it shouldn't be emphasized. He's just pulling out a dagger. He's not pulling out a dagger. My final grievance is the world. I already discussed a lot about how the history of this world isn't really talked about. We know nothing about it, but the world just isn't interesting. It could have been fixed again if we actually lived through these moments or these events. I liked how we get an image of the map at the beginning of each chapter so we know where people are, but I really hope she gets a new map for the sequel. The places we focus on are right in the center of the book page, so if you're reading the physical book, you can't really see the map, and it hardly helps because everything you need to see is like cut off. I also couldn't tell where a lot of the cities were, so it made the whole distance thing a lot harder. I was so confused by the places that I thought Riverdee, which is where Zodia spends most of her time, was the capital of Zenith. I was looking at the map and I didn't see a capital for Zenith, so I assumed that Riverdee was it because I didn't feel like they talked about Riverdee as its own country. So I thought they went to Riverdee. So when Zodia showed up to Riverdee and started fighting, I got really confused why it seemed like she was in two different places. And not only that, but then the Massidia's elites went past Zenith to go to Riverdee for some reason. Like that's where they were supposed to go to protect it, I guess. But we didn't see them stop by Zenith. So again, it didn't help the fact that you knew that some of the people that from Massidia went to Zenith and the other went to Riverdee. So again, I thought Riverdee and Zenith was like the same place. It was just kind of a mess. It just really needs an updated map and definitely a better explanation of the world. Okay, so moving on to the more spoiler part, and again, since this book is supposed to be character driven, I really wanted to discuss the actual characters, and so this is complete spoilers for the rest of the book. I wanted to start with Massidia, probably one of my favorite places, and their people got completely screwed over, and it's really the central conflict of the book. I really hated this whole plot because it seemed annoying. And I honestly didn't realize how bad it was until I started writing this for my review, and I realized, wow, I really hated what happened. So their backstory is that there are two families who believe they should have the throne. Only one of them do, and they are the Layless. The Victorians are the other people, but they seem to be on semi-peaceful terms, I guess. I mean, their heir Natalya goes with them to the peace talks, and I think the Duke has dinner with them. But at the same time, they're rebels or something like that for the Victorians. I really don't know. It's really kind of confusing. I don't understand how it starts off, but it honestly hardly even matters because once the plot gets going, they're not friends anyways. So the book starts as they send the Almurtags and Dorian to be diplomats to Zenith during these negotiation or peace talks. So during that time, everyone gets attacked by fiends. Massidia, Zenith, and Riverdee, and Massidia is attacked by fiends that are controlled by the Victorian Duchess. I honestly don't remember her name. I didn't care to go back and look for it. So they captured and imprisoned her. She gives some exposition on the bad guys and her background, and honestly, I won't even really talk about the bad guys for the rest of this book. They were far and few between being brought up, and I'm kind of confused by them, and I don't think it was really the point. It was mostly character driven, and I don't think that they're necessarily important in this book. Anyway, so after this, for some reason, no one in Zenith and at the peace talks believes that the Duchess can control them. I guess they're kind of just thinking, well, you hated her, so you use this as a reason to take her, or something like that, as if they weren't busy defending themselves instead of going out and attacking the Duchess. Also, Roland saw that the Duchess killed her husband for some reason. I don't know if there was one, or if there was a reason, I don't think it was a really good one. So yeah, since she was captured, I guess the word got out about how she killed her husband and controlled the fiends, but the rebels are still on her side and now want to have like a civil war with the Layless. So the countries around the city, I think there's like 5 of them, don't want a civil war because it will affect their money and their economy. Okay, that's fine, but then they think that the Victorians should lead. So they make a treaty and are basically forcing the Layless to surrender and release control to the Victorians. I have no idea why. It's kind of ridiculous. They just don't believe that the Duchess did what they said she did. And there's absolutely no communication. And honestly, these people shouldn't even have the authority to tell them what to do. And then on top of that, our great King of Peace, Gerard, agrees against the Layless. I'll get to him later. I really don't like him. So the Layless go on the run, and their adopted son Dorian and Elizabeth go back to Mysidia to make the Layless surrender. But the Layless are dead, and the Duchess is alive, and then they all blame Gwen because they think Diedrich did it. And that's the last we hear of them. And like I said, I actually didn't realize how much I hated this whole thing until I had to explain it. So let's get to the characters, and we'll start with Pierre. I can pretty much just rope Pierre and Gerard together. He's the leader and best friends with Gerard. I didn't really like him. We pretty much just see him being cruel to his son early on and defending Gerard, which is funny later. And then he's cruel to Zodia, basically just saying he doesn't care about these prisoners, just kill them or torture them or whatever. He's really torture happy. Then we get a genuinely good moment with him feeling really conflicted about how he can't let the Duchess take over because she's even more cruel than he is. And he decides he's going to sacrifice himself to kill the Duchess, and by sacrificing himself he's going to be taken prisoner and probably executed, because again, these people who are not from his country decide so, because that makes sense. But then everyone but the Duchess are murdered by the shapeshifter dressed as Diedrich, which I actually wanted to point out I feel is completely irrelevant. I assume the Duchess is on the same side as the shapeshifter, or at least hired him. So making him look like Diedrich in the novel is only a red herring so that us, the reader, think that it actually is Diedrich, because the Duchess could literally have said anything, and for some reason they'll all believe her, unlike the Layless. So whatever. Moving on to the next characters, the Almurtags, which is the sibling family to the Layless. So it's Pierre's sister's family. None of them are really notable except for Elizabeth, who I actually did like at first. She's just this kind of sweet person, but then irrationally at the very end thinks that Gwen set all of this up or something. She even thinks it's odd that Gwen would convince Roland to give the dagger to Diedrich instead of Dorian, because unless she straight up just doesn't believe Gwen when Gwen says that Diedrich helped save Zenith, it makes sense to reward him. And why would Dorian want the dagger anyways? This all happened, this meaning all of this happened with Gwen and Diedrich before we knew that the Layless would lose power, or that Elizabeth would have even been betrothed to Dorian. And the reason why we never gave the dagger to Dorian was because he may have given it to the Victorian people. So it was just this weird, annoying last-minute change of heart and a jump to logic, really, to fuel drama. And as I said about the romance, a lot of her character was just how she felt towards Dorian anyways. So speaking of Dorian, again, we really needed his backstory to see how he worked as their son. He didn't really seem to matter, and he didn't seem like their adopted son at all. I honestly thought it was really shitty he just sort of turned on his family. And that's kind of all I got to say. I mean, like I said, most of his character was just how he was with Natalya, who's his ex-fiancée, and now he's betrothed to Elizabeth, and apparently he seems to actually like her, which wasn't set up at all on his end, and honestly leaves me really confused. Like, he seems into marrying her, even talking about where they're gonna get married, and he seems to like really care for her. I don't know. It seems really shoehorned in. Next, we're gonna talk about Natalya. I honestly hated her. I literally did not know what to make of her. She flip-flopped a lot. I thought it interesting how Gerard made her a ward of Zenith so she wouldn't be pulled into this Mysidia civil war. It's like the only thing that I felt he logically did. But then she honored Gerard by framing his daughter for his death. So yeah, she's a pretty shitty person. And Gerard is still proven to make terrible choices. Moving on, we have Roland. He was actually my favorite character of the whole book, and of all like the, I guess, teenagers you want to call them, like the main cast that weren't the parents. But it's actually kind of funny because I don't think he's even technically a main character. Like, you know, Elliot didn't make any like official art or sell official art for him or anything like that. He was just kind of like drawn in the book. None of his actions actively annoyed me. I was really always on his side. Like, he seemed to be annoyed at like the right things and upset about the right things, and like acted accordingly with what was going on. Like, his frustration seemed really valid. Again, most of his story was kind of how he liked Guinevere. That's why he wanted to give up the dagger. Speaking of which, I think it's completely ridiculous that Elliot Brooks did not write the scene where he gave away the dagger. I literally cannot fathom why she did not put that in. I barely already care about these magical objects that are supposed to be, I guess, the main point of the novel. I mean, it's what's being traded around, it's what's being schemed for, it's what the fiends are trying to find, and it just seems like a big deal. And we don't even get the impact of Roland giving up his role as a guardian and giving the dagger over. It was also in Roland's section where we first start to get to the action, and it took a while to get there, but it actually feels kind of weird because once we actually got there, I feel like there wasn't enough setup. I just think that maybe Elliot focused on the wrong things to build up, so that the time that the action actually happened, like I say, just the pacing was just completely out of whack. I'm also confused to why at the end of the novel he went all the way to Riverdee, which again is past Zenith, and he didn't stop to see Gwen in Zenith. I feel like this plot was really only set up just to create drama and like spark the central plot. I just want to reiterate here how we don't know these two as a couple. We hardly care about them, and we really need to see them before the book, because again, this whole thing is really bent on them caring so much about each other that they will give up their guardianship to be together, and it wasn't really focused on, even though technically the plot should have focused on it. So moving on to Zenith. Overall, fairly uninteresting. I mean, like I said, most of the places aren't really well described. We barely know anything about it, except that it seems like a utopia area ruled by the quote-unquote King of Peace. Except right at the end, Gerard reveals some information about the War of Fire that makes it even more troubling as to how the kingdom got to be so great. Like, it sounds like it was really on the ropes, and they burned a bunch of their land, and they just happened to make like a treaty with Prianthia and then break it to be on the side of Zodia, who had slaves. I don't know. I don't understand how this guy became the central focus of peace and why people are coming to his place. I mean, I actually completely forgot that it's talked about how they are like a country of scholars, but I don't really remember a lot of that. I mean, I guess they talk a lot about how they read, but I don't know. The place itself, again, we've already discussed this, how most of the world isn't fleshed out very well. A lot of time is focused in Zenith, but it really doesn't feel like a lot actually happens. It is the center of the controversy over Mysidia, as the rulers of like the 5 other kingdoms around Mysidia get together in Zenith and determine that another kingdom should surrender to their usurpers. So let that sink in, and let's just get on to the characters. Gerard. I really hated him. I didn't see any of the quote-unquote King of Peace that he should be known for. He seemed like a really bad king and a worse father. I mean, with the way that it was written, at one point he literally punched his daughter in the face and knocked her out. If anyone needed a backstory before this book, it was this guy. I didn't believe a single thing about him. I don't understand why he agreed with the Treaty of the Five to go against the Leyless and basically side with the Victorians to go to war against the Leyless without peace talks. Like, unless I'm missing something, that's literally the plot, and that's what happens. So remember how the only thing I said about Pierre is that he basically was really cruel, and one of the scenes was him being cruel to his son because his son dare speak badly against Gerard, and Pierre defended him? Well, big F you to Pierre, because Gerard didn't defend you. And again, I don't know if it was written this way, but yeah, it seemed that like they agreed that they were going to literally go to the Victorians, side with them, and yeah, of course they wanted the Leyless to surrender, but in general they were still going to support the Victorians, not go have peace talks, not try to negotiate. They were immediately like on the Victorian side. I really don't care what these 5 people wanted. It's not up to them to not believe a kingdom in what they say, as in they didn't believe the Macedians about capturing the Duchess, and they determined who rules it. That doesn't make any sense. And then on top of all of that, these Prianthians, which I really don't like them, or whoever they are, got to decide what to do with Zenith's princess. Like, holy crap, was I so frustrated by the injustices done to Gwen and Natalya that Gerard just let happen. Like, he just allowed it. He made so many mistakes, I just don't understand. Going back to A Bad Father, I don't think him and his son Aiden actually talked at all the entire book. So I hope we weren't supposed to, feel anything for them. I did find it interesting that it was set up how he would die of natural causes, and his dumbass was so secretive about it that only the Leylesses and Natalya's knight knew about it. So when he died, Natalya framed Gwen, because if not, she would have looked like she was the culprit. It's actually laughable how stupid his mistakes are. It's frustrating, but I don't know if it's necessarily bad writing, like how this plot ended up happening. But I do think it's bad writing that he wasn't set up to be a believable great ruler, because I don't see how any of us could think that he should be worthy of the title of King of Peace. So back to his sickness of him dying of natural causes, it doesn't make sense why other people just determined what to do with Gwen, and he let them say what they should do, because he should have known that she was weeks, if not days, from being the ruler after Gerard died. Like,
what an idiot.
Easily one of the most frustrating characters of this entire book. Let's move on to Guinevere. I didn't care for her at first. Much like Diedrich, I feel like she was a little too edgy and hot-headed to start off with. I think the injustices to her actually made me like her more, but nothing necessarily she herself did. She is, I suppose, a pretty confident and competent fighter, and I actually liked how we got glimpses of the leader she could be during the Battle of the Fiends scene, but honestly that scene was also like a pretty big mess, so it's not infallible. I really liked when she finally told Natalya to basically simmer down because she wouldn't shut up. And I liked how she really showed intellect and political maneuvering with some strategy better than her dad, who honestly, her dad was her biggest enemy this entire book more than anyone else. She's the main one I'm actually interested to follow into book 2, and it's why I'm really keen to be a beta reader. I really want to help Brooks bring this character to light and make her really great. I liked how they brought back the herb from the beginning of the book that her servant told her, how if you rub it through your hair, turns your hair blonde or whatever. I actually liked how they ended up bringing that back up at the very end to disguise her hair. So moving on to Sadie. So this whole place and its people really just made me sigh. Nothing overall really happens here in general, so we're just gonna get straight to the characters. Diedrich, of the main cast of young people, he's by far my least favorite. Not only do I not like his character, but he had the worst flow and pacing. In the beginning, it was really hard to follow. He's basically two people, a fiend hunter under another name, like an alias, and an assassin prince who kills the rebels / usurpers. Again, I feel like we really needed to see this before the story picked up. It hardly seems relevant that he's an assassin, besides the fact that I guess it gives the shapeshifter like more leverage when he goes around assassinating people because he's known as the assassin prince, so I guess it seems like something he would do. But then in the first part, most of what he does I do not care for. He first off goes by himself across the desert and gets attacked, injured, has sex, gets some information while internally monologuing about how annoyed he is, has more sex, then gets attacked again by a dragon. And when he wakes up, he's basically just keeps throwing up in this guy's hut. It just, Diedrich's chapters were insanely long, and I desperately wanted them to be over. Also, a really small gripe, but his scene splitters / like the time jumps in the pages were fancy pickaxes, and I don't really know why. I guess because he was traveling through like a mining town, but I thought it should be like his crossbow or something. It was kind of weird. As I mentioned before, his pacing is almost offensive. He spends way too much time at the dragon hut, basically throwing up and caring for this dragon. Then once the dragon finally agrees to help him, we don't get like any more bonding with him really. It's just poof, he's in Zenith, and he helps kill the behemoth in the attack of fiends, which is actually pretty cool. I would have liked to know more about it. Apparently it was just chilling in like the lake at the Zenith capital, which actually sounds really creepy but also interesting. I kind of wish it was like set up better, like they talked about like an ancient story or a legend about it or something. As luck would have it, Gwen agrees with Diedrich's idea about the dagger, and poof, he's in Mysidia, where we get a very lame and anticlimactic scene where he gets the dagger off screen, and then poof, he's back in the mountains. Although now for some reason so much time has passed that the insurgents / rebels / whatever they are have completely taken over the mountain area and very unceremoniously and gruesomely killed the dragon guy and the young dragon we spent all that time watching be nursed back to health. So anyways, the next time we see him, his brother shows up and stabs him with the dagger of Eve for some reason. I'll get to that in Abaddon's part, and that's the last we hear of him. Or is it? Apparently he's alive. Now, I completely believe Brooks when she says that she wrote this before reading Sanderson and that she hasn't read Aragon, but this basically felt like Kaladin meets Saphira, and it kind of just like ran off together. A lot of people really liked Syrah the dragon. I mean, she was fine. Like I said, she really felt like she was like Saphira from Aragon, like just a sassy dragon. But I kind of forgot about her by the end because she didn't really show up for the last like 40% of the book. So real quickly, I wanted to talk about Harold, the dad or the king of Sadie. He's not a major character, but I thought I'd point out another bad leader. Again, we could have gained a lot from this character if we actually saw when he literally liberated his people from slavery, because that sounds like really amazing and like really emotionally impactful, but we don't get any of that. Instead, all we get from him is that his wife dies and he decides to not only kill himself but make his son do it because suicide's a big no-no. So, you know, who cares about your children or your country? Your wife is dead.
So we kill ourselves? Kill ourselves?
So yeah, he's a really great guy. Speaking of great guys, Abaddon, the second prince? I think he's the young prince, but honestly I never really cared about which one was the older one. At first he's pretty unassuming, but I actually found him pretty interesting. I'm a big sucker for like medical type people, and his alchemy seemed really cool. I thought that the idea and a general plot that he was the one making his mother sick in order to get his brother to go get the dagger of Eve was actually pretty interesting. I don't exactly follow why he wants the dagger. I guess it just makes their country more powerful because they won't die, like anyone in their family, even though it's still not really talked about how the dagger works. Which is actually another big problem. It doesn't discuss how these artifacts work. Like, how long have there been guardians for them? Like, first off, if the dagger is supposed to make you immortal, why are there multiple guardians anyway? Shouldn't the one person with the dagger be immortal? So shouldn't there only ever be one person? I don't understand. It's again, the idea that that was his plot, that he maneuvered all of that, was really interesting. But the actual setup and reveal was insanely lackluster. Like, he just says it. Like, he just switched to his point of view, and he's just like, yeah, it's a good thing nobody knows that I'm killing my mom or whatever, and for some reason, my poison is making her in a coma, and I don't know why nobody else is in a coma like she is. Like, he just says it. It's just revealed like that. Like, I actually had to reread it, and I was like, oh, hey, this really big plot twist moment is just generally mentioned here. That's fine. It also reveals that him and his dad are actually pretty cruel people, kind of just killing, like, whoever to keep it quiet that, like, the mom is dying, because then the insurgents will rise up and know they're weak or something. Yeah, they're really great people. But then a page later, Abaddon chooses not to kill this random woman. I'm honestly not too sure why. I barely knew him as a non-murderer, then I barely knew him as a murderer before all this happened, so I don't really care one way or another. But then the next we get of him, he's just murdered his brother with the dagger, and that's it. He's the king of his country. I really just don't understand. I understand. I just don't understand her flow with this character. I'm actually wondering if she never originally wrote Abaddon's point of view, but the beta readers didn't understand or thought he needed to be in it more to make the ending pay off, so she went in and revised it. If that happened, I actually feel the opposite. I think if we actually didn't get Abaddon's point of view at all, and it was like discovered, I guess in a better way than just like him showing up and his brother revealing everything like in a villain monologue, but like I just don't understand why we had such a major interesting plot point just be told to us by Abaddon, and like that's it. So I almost feel like she originally wrote it to where we don't see anything for Abaddon, and then he comes back, and then he just stabs his brother, and we're all like, oh, what happened? And then maybe beta readers were like, I don't like this because who's this guy, and why? Just why? And so she was like, okay, I'll write a little bit. But it wasn't really well written. So I can only assume that he's so scared of death and terrified that he went through all these lengths just to protect himself, even though he didn't actually seem that selfish. He seemed to want to protect his whole family, not just himself, so I'm not really sure why we got to where we are here. There's a lot of back and forth between him and Dorian in letters, like in between like the chapters, but I honestly can't tell if any of it was important. I assume that the dagger works by maybe taking the life essence of someone else, so he, stabbed someone, it takes their life essence, and then the person who was the stabber could, be immortal or use that person's life force. But if this is true, I don't know why Abaddon would use his brother. He could have used anyone. I also don't know how Diedrich would have survived it unless Abaddon killed him for some like other reason, like something we don't know, that like, he didn't want his brother to be the king, so he's just like, I'm just gonna kill you for no reason. And then maybe incidentally that's how the dagger works, that it's like you have to stab the person, and like when you stab them it like gives them the life force, so even though he thought he was killing Diedrich, he was really giving it immortality or saving him or something. I don't really know. Or Diedrich called on the dagger while he was being stabbed and came back after everyone thought he was dead. So maybe when the dagger was in him being stabbed by his brother, he called on the dagger and it gave him life, and Abaddon, I guess, never knew. He just left his almost sort of dead body. My last theory is that maybe Diedrich actually called on the dagger before he handed it to his brother, so that he already had the power when he died. I'm not really sure. I just think it's kind of bad writing to set up two cliffhangers and questions at once. Like, why did Abaddon kill his brother, and then why Diedrich didn't die? It's more annoying than interesting, honestly. I also wonder if I missed something or she didn't write something, but it seemed like, I guess, Diedrich was battling. Like, he had like a spear and he seemed tired or something like that. I don't know. I don't understand what happened at the end of the book, and I feel like it was not a good cliffhanger. It just seems to be like missing something. So lastly, Zodia. I would say we really needed her backstory, but honestly we didn't need her at all in this book. But technically, I would say we still needed her backstory to figure out why she was so isolated or alone, because her kind of ending emotional reveals when she's like naked in the river with what's his face, and she's just like, oh, I'm so tired of being alone and isolated, I want somebody to be with or something or whatever. So again, we kind of needed more of that back when she was on the island to kind of understand where she was coming from. But her whole story is that she, for some reason, was chosen to go across the sea because of a vision that she saw that basically has to do with the destruction of her people. So her people just sent this girl who won't use her powers against humans and even feels bad about using them against fiends just because she has the visions and can heal. And it's not even that, like, and you would think, oh, well, technically she sent them, you know, with this group of people on a boat or something like that. But even the people on the boat were like, we're not supposed to go on land. So it's like she was literally going by herself, and that makes no sense. And her doomsday vision, as most people have said, is completely irrelevant. Like, once it's literally just brought up to like get her across the sea, and it's completely forgotten about. She's just imprisoned for like the entire book and falls for one of the knights. Again, it's almost completely love story based, or at least it's very love story centric. I just don't care for this, and I feel like it just shouldn't have been in this book. I think it would have been a lot more interesting if she was hinted at, so she could have been mentioned by Roland and like the Messidians, and then maybe in the sequel it could have been interesting if you actually started off with her point of view, so it kind of backtracks a bit and you kind of are putting in pieces from the first book. You're like, oh yeah, I remember when Roland talked about her here and the knights were dealing with something here, and it's just like, I feel like she just should have been in the second book. There was no reason for her to be in the first book. So that's it. That is unfortunately my very long and critical review of a booktuber I highly respect and enjoy. You know, since I followed her for almost 2 years, and she's been a booktuber longer than 2 years, but I've followed her for roughly 2 years, I've always known her as a fan of Sanderson. So the fact that this was written before all of that seems like a big red flag for me. I feel like she may have written this before she had a lot of experience with great storytelling. You know, I really wish she would have chosen to revise the book, or maybe even save it and, you know, write one before it, or even split up the focus on only some of the characters. You know, like leaving Zodia and other little stories for the future, or not included them at all. I don't really care for these characters, and there just really wasn't any growth. And I understand that it probably was, I mean, this is a huge book and it's a big undertaking. It's just, and she seems pretty happy with the results and the ratings are decently good. It's just, I feel like it was a really big missed opportunity, and you only get like one shot at the first book in a series, and I really just feel like it should have been discussed and revised, and she should have taken the time to, you know, split it up or rewrite it or write a whole nother book before this one. I'm just really sad, but I think Brooks has actually had a lot of experience since she wrote this one, and I have really high hopes for her sequel. So yeah, that's my discussion for Peace and Turmoil. You know, let me know what you guys think. Let me know if you agree, disagree. You know, we can talk about what you guys thought about the book. That's all for me. Thank you guys and have a good one. And I'll see you all next time. Bye.